The women who keep teams stable are often the first ones forgotten. When promotion decisions start pretending to measure leadership, because the workplace does not reward the person absorbing chaos nearly as often as it rewards the person narrating order. If that sentence hits something painful, you already know this pattern is real, even if nobody has named it. You become indispensable in the daily mess, yet strangely optional the moment titles, compensation, succession plans, and visibility enter conversation. And that contradiction confuses smart women for years because they assume being central to function also makes them central to power. It usually does not. Here is what actually happens inside organizations that praise reliability while quietly promoting self-protection. The woman holding everything together becomes infrastructure, and infrastructure is expected, leaned on, consumed, and noticed mainly when it fails. Nobody applauds the ceiling for not collapsing, even though everybody depends on it more than they depend on the chandelier. So your competence gets categorized as environmental, not strategic, which means your labor is treated like background conditions instead of leadership. That is the first hidden rule. The work that prevents pain rarely earns the same status as work that performs power. Women especially get trapped here because female competence is still read through service, smoothing, support, and emotional steadiness. If you make the team less anxious, less disorganized, less reactive, people experience relief, but they do not necessarily see authority. They see someone helpful, they see someone mature, they see someone safe enough to lean on without renegotiating hierarchy. And the deeper problem is that organizations often confuse your willingness to stabilize dysfunction with your natural place inside it. When you rescue deadlines, translate chaos, calm conflict, and catch mistakes before leadership sees them, you protect everyone's image. Including the manager whose poor planning created the emergency, the senior director who stayed vague, and the coworkers who coasted. Your effort lowers the visible cost of their weakness, which means your excellence becomes camouflage for someone else's limitations. That is why some women are privately praised nonstop, then publicly bypassed when promotions, stretch opportunities, and succession conversations appear. Private praise is cheap when public endorsement would force accountability, budget, sponsorship, and an actual redistribution of authority. This is the part nobody warns you about. Being valued and being advanced are related, but they are not identical. A woman can be essential to outcomes while remaining structurally inconvenient to promote, because promotion would remove her from useful invisibility. The team needs your labor more than leadership needs your rise, and those are two completely different organizational priorities. If you have ever trained the new manager, covered for her blind spots, then watched her evaluate your presence, that is why. You were functioning as hidden management already, but without the title, protection, leverage, or narrative ownership that makes leadership legible. Legibility matters more than women want to believe, because promotions are not rewards for truth. They are decisions about perception. And perception inside modern offices is shaped by repetition, visibility, sponsorship, and whose version of events sounds most managerial. The woman solving interpersonal messes in Slack threads, side conversations, and back-channel clarifications is building function, not always image. Meanwhile, someone else is summarizing themes in meetings, attaching language to outcomes, and making their thinking easier to sponsor. Here is the quiet part. Organizations often promote the person who appears to contain complexity, not the person silently carrying it. And women are disproportionately socialized to carry complexity without dramatizing it, which makes their contribution easier to exploit. You fix the slide deck, soften the conflict, remember the birthday, prep the talking points, and coach the fragile manager. Then review season arrives, and suddenly your work is described as dependable, collaborative, positive, and supportive instead of promotable. That language sounds flattering until you notice what is missing. Strategic, high impact. Visionary, influential, commercially sharp, executive. Women often get wrapped in adjectives that affirm character while quietly denying authority, as if integrity were the opposite of power. This is why so many high-functioning women leave reviews feeling disoriented instead of informed, praised, yet somehow penalized. Nothing sounds obviously hostile, but the consequences are real: less sponsorship, weaker visibility, stalled titles, smaller raises, thinner protection. Because once people assign you to the role of stabilizer, they stop imagining you as the one who should disturb the map. Promotion, at least at meaningful levels, is not just recognition. It is a reallocation of power, access, and interpretive control. And organizations resist reallocating power to women whose current unpaid labor is keeping too many weak systems from showing cracks. What makes this worse is that women are taught to interpret increased reliance as increased respect, even when it is extraction. If everyone comes to you, if your calendar is packed, if crises find you first, it can feel like rising. Sometimes it is, but often it means your role has expanded faster than your formal authority, compensation, or political insulation. That gap is dangerous because it lets the organization demand leadership behavior from you while denying leadership terms to you. You are expected to think ahead, regulate emotion, align people, protect culture, and absorb fallout without becoming costly. The moment you ask for corresponding authority, some of that appreciation suddenly changes tone and starts sounding like concern. Now you are not the steady one. Now you are ambitious, frustrated, political, less collaborative, harder to work with. This is how soft retaliation begins in many offices. Nothing dramatic, just temperature shifts, slower replies, thinner invitations, vaguer feedback. Maybe your manager suddenly needs everything in writing. Maybe your skip level stops mentioning you in rooms you once shaped. Maybe the coworker you carried starts presenting polished summaries of work you made possible, with cleaner distance from the mess. And because the retaliation is subtle, you waste precious months questioning your sensitivity instead of reading the pattern correctly. You know this feeling well. Nothing explicit enough to report, yet enough to alter how your reputation starts traveling. That is because reputations are not only built from achievements, they are built from recurring emotional impressions attached to your name. If people feel soothed by you, they may respect you less than the person who makes judgment look expensive. Not always consciously, but in promotion rooms, calm service gets mistaken for support function, while polished certainty gets mistaken for leadership. This becomes even harsher for women because assertiveness is still filtered through likability, tone, warmth, and threat management. Be too accommodating and you disappear into usefulness. Be too clear and suddenly people discover you were intimidating. So many women split themselves trying to find the magical ratio of warm enough, sharp enough, quiet enough, strong enough. But the deeper problem is not personal calibration. It is a system that profits from women who regulate themselves constantly. Self-monitoring becomes unpaid labor too, especially when you are spending energy making male fragility, manager anxiety, and team tension manageable. And while you are performing all that invisible management, someone else is freer to sound decisive, detached, and promotion-ready. This is why competence alone does not protect women in organizations. It can actually trap them in exploitability. The more capable you are, the more tempting it becomes for leadership to leave you exactly where you are. Because moving you would force them to replace not only your output, but your emotional glue, institutional memory, and cleanup. And most organizations are worse at replacing women's invisible labor than they are willing to admit in strategy meetings. So instead of promoting you, they normalize you. They make your overfunctioning feel like personality instead of organizational dependency. That way, when you finally burn out, leave, or start setting limits, they can describe the disruption as your change. Not the system's dependence on you, not the manager's underdevelopment, not the culture that treated your resilience like surplus inventory. And that changes everything, because once you see the mechanism, the shame starts leaving and the strategy starts clarifying. You stop asking, why am I so needed and still overlooked, and start asking, who benefits from that arrangement? That question is colder, but it is far more useful than blaming your tone, your patience, or your ambition. Because once you understand extraction, you also understand why boundaries often trigger backlash faster than good work triggers reward. A boundary does something your excellence never did. It reveals the true cost of relying on you without advancing you. That is why some women get more political resistance after becoming clearer, not after becoming weaker or less helpful. Clarity interrupts convenience, and convenience in many workplaces has been masquerading as appreciation for a very long time. So, what does real promotion readiness look like when you have spent years being rewarded for making everybody comfortable? First, it means separating contribution from visibility because doing the work and being seen as directional are different games. Second, it means noticing where your labor disappears into team wellness, manager relief, and project continuity without attached authorship. Third, it means paying attention to who repeats your ideas upward, who names your impact publicly, and who never does. Because the absence of sponsorship is often disguised as neutrality when it is actually permission for your erasure. You do not need everyone to like you. You need the right people to attach leadership language to your name. And if nobody with power is doing that while continuing to rely on you heavily, that information matters. It means you may be inside a role designed to consume your steadiness while keeping your advancement permanently negotiable. At that point, working harder usually deepens the trap because you are feeding the very machine misreading your value. Sometimes the most strategic move is not proving more. It is making your contribution harder to absorb without acknowledgement. That can mean cleaner documentation, sharper ownership language, fewer invisible rescues, and less emotional cushioning for chronic disorganization. Not as punishment, as reality, because systems only register dependencies they cannot quietly outsource to your nervous system. And if that sounds harsh, remember what has already been harsh: carrying teams, protecting reputations, and still being framed smaller. The woman who holds everyone together is often told she's lucky to be trusted instead of asking trusted for what. Trusted for the cleanup, trusted for the diplomacy, trusted for the extra work nobody wants visible on an org chart. That is not a promotion path by itself. It is often a containment strategy dressed in appreciation language. Real advancement begins when you stop confusing access to your labor with access to decision-making power. It begins when you notice who protects your reputation when you are absent, because that reveals whether support is real. It begins when you understand that called and valuable can be a compliment or a warning that they mean to keep using you. Because the truth many women feel but cannot quite say is this: stability is valuable, but visibility governs reward. And in workplaces built on image, the person who carried the weight is often the last person they want seen carrying it.